Alors bonsoir tout le monde, bienvenue.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this regular public meeting of the Dieppe City Council, this 8th of May. I just have a brief statement before we get started. Last week, our Director of the Environment presented the highlights of the proposed tree bylaw. This evening, we will read it for a first and second time. We need 4 readings before it becomes an official bylaw of the city. And essentially, at the next meeting in 2 weeks, we should have the third and final readings. Residents are invited to share their comments and their concerns with us on this proposed tree bylaw that has generated a lot of interest from all of the maritime provinces. And of course, there are concerns, but there are a number of comments have been received on this proposed bylaw, and you can make your comments by filling out the form that is available on the homepage of the municipality's website. In order to make sure that we can efficiently analyze all of the comments received through this online form, all of these comments will be considered. Over the last 2 years, residents and council members have clearly voiced their concerns about the importance of trees in our community, and therefore very pleased. I hope that you will answer and fill out the form in great numbers and share your comments and your concerns with us. I'm sure that we can work together in order to ensure a sustainable future for the whole municipality and to ensure a quality of life for everybody. So on that, let's continue on with our regular business.
La ville de Dieppe reconnaît que
The city of Dieppe recognizes that the land on which it operates is part of the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship that the Mi'kmaq jointly developed and signed with the British Crown in the 18th century. These treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands or resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between the parties. Colleagues, for the opening word, dear colleagues, let's have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. First item on the agenda. Too many papers here. So, welcome to all once again. We've had the opening word. The meeting is now called to order. We do have quorum. We do have a quorum, Mr. Clerk? Yes, we do. Are there any conflicts of interest? No declaration, no conflicts of interest have been declared. Let's move on then to the adoption of the agenda. I would need a motion to adopt the agenda. It's been moved by Councillor Lantaigne, seconded by Councillor Thibodeau on the question. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. We are now in a closed session. presentations, inquiries, and petitions. We are item 7.1, inquiries by council members, Kodiak Regional RCMP. And you had a rest. It's, I believe you were away, but it's nice to see you once again, Inspector Farah. So do you have things to share with us before we move on to the question? Yes, good evening, Your Worship, councillors. Our community police officers are very busy in the region with certain of the problem files over the last few weeks. I just wanted to mention that as well as making community presentations, they have worked with people who organized demonstrations and to make sure that we had good communication with these groups to make sure everybody was still on the same page in terms of respect, their respect to be heard, but to make sure that everybody acted in safety and respect. So yes, there was good communication and everybody was held, everything was held safely and efficiently. Now, in terms of the crime reduction unit, on May 2nd, we executed a search warrant on Mills Road. We were an important quantity of drugs were seized, including cocaine, and some firearms. A man was arrested and will be facing charges in August. Over the last 2 weeks, there have been walk and bike patrols in the region in order to increase our visibility and our presence in the downtown area, more specifically in the areas where we have received the greatest number of complaints in terms of open air drug use. We found a woman and a man who had arrest warrants against them, and we were able to arrest them. Now, there was a press release that was issued saying that on April 13th, we had intercepted a vehicle that was suspected of, that was suspicious. And the police officers noticed that this vehicle was stealing fuel from construction sites. We suspect that they hit more than one site with, and we arrested a 39-year-old man and a 38-year-old woman. And we were able to establish that it was stolen uh, fuel as well as equipment. So good work by the patrol. Today we had some radar activity on Melanson. See, the patrol officers were there this morning at 8 a.m. and stayed for about an hour close to Amiro Street. We issued seven violations, and later this afternoon we went back to the same area and we gave another 7 tickets and 9 warnings, everything because of the speeding. So this is just a reminder that we are present in the school zones. We're doing that for our youth, for everybody's safety. So if it's expensive, well, then just slow down. The provincial traffic team was in the area on April 18th, and I'd like to point out when they come, because really we are in partnership with this provincial unit, and we have great results. On April 18th, we arrested one man who was prohibited from driving. We suspended another driver who was driving impaired. We intercepted 5 uninsured vehicles, and we towed 14 vehicles. In total, we gave out 132 tickets, including 34 for the use of a cell phone while driving. So once again, slow down and respect the rules of the road. And in closing, next week will be the national week of the police officers from May 14th to 20th. We want to continue to build strong relationships with our communities and our youth. We want to start making more presentations to the community. You're going to see our police officers are going to be speaking to different groups on drunk driving, on drugs, on internet safety and fraud, all issues that are very important. to stay safe. And on May 14th is Mother's Day. So on behalf of all of the RCMP Kodiak members, we hope that all of the mothers have a great day. And same to you. Thank you. Questions from councillors? Councillor Brideau. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Farah, for the excellent work being done. I'm really happy for the people on Melanson Street because at least this tactic of stopping people who are speeding, well, it worked. Could we have the same service on Gaspé Street? Because for a few weeks now, it seems to me that stop signs just don't exist anymore, and speeding is up to everybody to decide. So even just this evening, I saw a car go by like a ball of fire. I said, well, this is a residential area, please. So please, thank you. I will give the message. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Farah. And thank you for all the work you do. We know that you can't be everywhere, and that's what we tell our citizens, that you are doing a great job. You can't be everywhere, and we know that you're short-staffed as well. Now, because of the nice weather coming, like every year, we have more and more thefts from schools, from sheds. There was a car that was stolen on Lavoie Street. The they broke the car window. They took the garage door opener, entered into the house with it, and well, the police are on it, on the case. But my question is, are there patrols during the night in these neighborhoods? Patrols done by the RCMP in the middle of the night? And I know you can't be everywhere, but are there patrols in residential areas in the middle of the night? Yes, we patrol 24/7 in the Dieppe Moncton Riverview area. And I can tell you that if people see something suspicious, don't hesitate, call it in. We prefer to hear that. We prefer to hear, oh, there's a car that seems fishy, the car is parked there and we don't know why. It's better to report it, but as a we, the neighbors, your neighbors, the neighborhood are the best eyes. We can't be everywhere. If a car is there and then leaves, yeah, but what happens is that it's the middle of the night and people are sleeping. And I know you can't be everywhere, but I do have a neighborhood watch page with the residents, and this is what I shared this with them to make them aware. But I always tell them to report it to the RCMP, and speeding as well. I had a complaint from a resident of Golf Street just before you get to the clubhouse. There's a big hill there and cars that go up there very quickly. And I think she complained to the city as well. There's a children's park there and the visibility is reduced. There's a blind hill. So if you could give that message as well. Thank you. And other than that, well, we have to deal with what we have, right? Thank you. Thank you. Any further comments? If not, let's move on. Thank you for your presentation. And once again, as always, you're welcome to stay if you'd like, but we will understand if you have other matters to tend to. Next item on the agenda, 7.2, the presentation of the financial statements. We have Ms. Lise Casey here. She's going to talk to us about that. And then we will turn to our CFO, our Director of Finances, for questions afterwards. Good evening. Thank you, Your Worship. So this evening, I'm going to give you the results of the audit for the fiscal 2022. First of all, I'd just like to confirm that we did conduct the audit according to the Canadian Generally Accepted Accounting Standards, and we are independent of the city. These financial statements were prepared in accordance with the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards, what we call the PSAS, and this is what we use in order to come up with the audited financial standards. We just like to say that my presentation was sent in advance, but we do intend to issue an unqualified audit opinion, which means that your financial statements are in accordance with the PSAS standards. So there are audit procedures that we must follow right up to the date of the report. And once it becomes available, we will review the annual report that will include these financial statements. Your financial statements are consolidated, which means they include the city of Dieppe, all funds, includes expansion Dieppe and Gestion 1604. The three are consolidated, and we don't include interdepartmental transactions. Now, if we go to the revenues, these are the revenues according to PSAS accounting for in 2022. Now, the warrant of assessment was for 57.49 million compared to 53.7, so a difference of $3.7 million or 7%. The sales of service, mostly water and sewage, their revenues 2022 were 14 million compared to 13.3, an increase of 723,000. Now, in terms of the contribution from other governments towards capital assets, the revenue in 2022 was 5.2 million compared to 3.8 million, so an increase of 1.4 million. And other revenues, the 8.8 million compared to 11 million in 2021. So that's a decrease of $2.1 million for a total revenues in 2022 of $85.6 million compared to 81.9 million in 2021, an increase of 3.7 million or 4.5%. Now, if you look at the expenditures by category or the main expenditures here, transportation, in 2022, you expended $16.2 million compared to $14.6 million in 2021, an increase of 1.6 million or 11.2%. Protective services and 15.5 million in 2022 compared to 13.9 million or a $1.5 million difference. Recreation and culture, $12.029 million in 2022 compared to 11 million, an increase of $985,000. And all other sources of expenditure for 24.2 million in 2022 compared to 24.8 million, a decrease of 615,000 for total expenditures, according to your consolidated financial statements of 68,071,000 compared to 64,500,000, an increase of 3.5 million, $3.568 million. Now, if you look at the surplus in all the revenues, the total revenue here, minus the total expenditures, the surplus according to the PSAS standards, the public service accounting standards, give you a surplus of 17.5 million compared to 17.4 million in 2021. It's very consistent in 2022 compared to 2021. The difference is only $147,000. If you look at the results according to the municipal fund accounting method, and Stefan will be able to present more on this, but I do confirm that the surplus for the general operating fund was 610,000, and the surplus for water and sewage was 599,926, for a total surplus of the two funds to $1,210,446,000. So as you'll have noticed, there is a fairly big difference between the results by fund accounting compared to the results according to the public service accounting standard. If you want to see the concrete details, refer to note 17 in the financial standards, in the financial statements. But there are capital assets contributed by developers that's not part of our fund accounting. That's 3.8 million. Capital expenditures, this is an expense, doesn't appear as an expense for according to PSAS, 3.4 million. Long-term debt repayment is not included in your public service accounting method. That's 7.2 million. Transfers to and from reserves, $9.1 million. In your financial statements, we add a asset amortization, and that's not a part of the fund accounting. That's 12 million, and the prior year surplus as well. Now, if we look at your reserve funds, municipalities keep reserve funds. You have five. You have the general operating reserve. At the end of 2022, you had $3.149 million. It was $22,048,000 for the capital reserve. The operating reserve, water and sewage, the reserve was $694,953 at the end of 2022. Your reserve, capital reserve, water and sewage was $4,478,000, and land for public services, $183,000. For a total in your reserve funds in 2022, $30,554,000, which is an increase of $8,333,000. And the capital reserves don't have a limit, but your general operating reserve and your water and sewage operating reserve is limited to 5% of your operating budget from the previous year. There are limits. At the end of December 2022, you were at 5%, so right at the limit available to you under the regulations. Now, financial ratios, these are not necessarily found in your financial statements, but they do come from your audited financial statements. The first ratio is the reimbursement of interest and capital as a percentage of total expenditures. This ratio represents, well, if you take your general operating fund, what is the percentage of the total budget is used in order to reimburse the debt? And that is the principal and interest payments. Since 2012, the ratio has gone down, which means the situation is improving. By the end of 2022, the ratio was 10.81%. So at 10.8% of your budget goes to repaying the debt. That's what we mean here. And of course, your budget goes up, and you'll notice that your debt goes up, but the ratio goes down. So it's a very good ratio here for the city of Dieppe. Now, if we look at capital investments, this is a graph that shows the change over the last 10 years. So the city has invested $10.6 million in 2022, and in 2019, there was a lot of construction that represents the larger figures in those years. That was the Uniplex in 2019, 2020. Now, our debt balance, the debt balance at the end of 2022 was $62,109,000. You can see that the debt is going down. The debt balance is going down compared to 2019. Over the last 4 years, as a matter of fact, the debt has decreasing substantially over the last 4 years. And here, this is just to show you the comparison of the operating budget and the taxable value. There's a number of figures on this table, but just to show that the total budget in 2022 and 2023, but 2023 excluding the former LSDs, but there's an increase of 5.6% in 2022 and 11.7 was expected for 2023, but the taxable value went up. So in 2022, compared to 2021, had gone up by 13.3%. And in 2023, it's gone up by 14.8%, the annual variation. And the tax rate, the budget goes up and the values go up, but the tax rate has gone down by 5.5 and 5.2% over the last 2 years. And that wraps up my presentation. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Any questions from councillors? I the silence confirms that perhaps no. Councillor Leboutier, thank you, Your Worship. I don't know who I should ask my question, but I had a couple of questions on the financial statements, but it's for information. On page 69, no, sorry, I have the answer right there. Term deposit. We have $11 million in term deposits, two different types. Is there an act or in our term deposits, as a municipality, can we go shopping for better interest rates, for example? Mr. Thériault. The answer is yes and no. Oh, you should go into politics. No, nothing is very clear ever. No, in the past, you could, absolutely. We could have gone to any bank and try and negotiate your interest rates. But since we are now with the Uniplex, and the word uni comes from uni, the credit union, and so we have an agreement that we have to deal with them for a 15-year period. So we can no longer go shopping around to other banks for that 15-year period. So are we making sure that we have the best rates on these 11 million? We always compare it to the market rates. And so, yes, and so far it has. Now, they have to look at the markets, and yes, absolutely, they have been so far. Thank you. On page 89, I see that there is a deficit of 546,000 for expansion Dieppe. I would like to have an explanation. Was it already explained and I forgot, or no, this is a reimbursement of some advances that the city had made in 2009. The city had advanced some funds, and in when the revenue came in 2022, it was reimbursed. Thank you. Okay. No further questions. Thank you. Councillor Godbout. Thank you, Your Worship. I have a very simple question. The acquisitions in 2022, 68,624. That's all we purchased in lots, land on paid the table 15, capital assets. What do we have in the budget this year? Perhaps for a question for Mr. Thériault, have we budgeted more or less this year? Well, in terms of land purchases and other capital assets, we have two budgets for land purchases. The first one is $550,000 in order to continue on with purchases for the Gauvin Island in front of the market and Rue Gauvin and Champlain Streets. So we're buying those houses bit by bit. So the budget is ongoing. We have money in the budget for the future years, and we have $5.2 million for large scale projects. So certain purchases that we made this year, well, in this year's budget, it's about 3 million in total for this year. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? So thank you for the presentation. And as the few questions would suggest, I think a number of communities would like to have the same problems as we do. So there are a few slides on the subject by our staff person.
Bonne soirée, Monsieur le maire, membres du conseil.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors, public. As our auditor just explained to us, the province asks us to prepare our budget according to the cash method of accounting, money that comes in, money that goes out. That's the cash method, and we prepare our budget accordingly. But we have to prepare our financial statements according to the public service accounting standard. So we have to prepare our budgets for one way and our financial statements the other way. What I'm going to do this evening is to show you the budget, our figures according to the cash accounting method. And then so it'll be easier to compare apples to apples.
De caisse ou par fonds, on a fait un surplus de 610 000 au niveau du fonds de fonctionnement général.
We have a surplus of $70,000 and 600,000 with water and sewage. So it's 1.2 million. And afterward, Ms. Casey has shown the gap, which brings us to the amount. The important thing is $1.2 million for us. More specifically, we have, let me show you the first line in blue. We're in September of last year. I was asking two things of my directors. First of all, I want to have the figures for the coming year, so from 2023. And in this case, I also asked them to estimate what their expenditures are until the end of the year. So we're in September, and we are looking toward the end of December. We estimated a surplus of 3.3 million for the general operating fund. We transferred last December $3.1 million to the reserve. So we have $200,000 left over from that amount. From September, October until December, the figures continue to come in, and we show a surplus of $4.5 million. Or I'm sorry, $425,000 for a surplus at the end of the year, $610,000. We transferred $0.9 million, and there was a $425,000 which appeared in October and December, which brought us up to 600,000. This is what I'm going to present in the coming slides with a little more detail. So with regard to the general operating fund, the $3.3 million, it's mainly accounting for salaries. In 2021, we had many new positions, and some in 2022 had not yet been filled. So this gave us a gap. In 2022, many new positions were also offered. And on the top of that, we also had human resources had some difficulties over 3 or 4 months. So no hirings were being done. So this created some surpluses with regard to salaries because we had many vacant positions. With regard to revenue, $1.6 million in revenues, we're talking here about construction permits that we budgeted $500,000 for, and we estimated that at $1.2 million that we ended up with. So there was a $700,000 surplus there. Interest, we talked a moment ago about that. We have a good rate of interest. We don't have to do any term to us. Just the money that's in the bank is bringing us in interest. And of course, this has created some surpluses with regard to the interest accumulated. And we talked about expansion Dieppe, $500,000, which we received from that organization, which brought us up to 2.6 million. General administration, there's a small deficit there, mainly explained by financial incentives. We had a budget of $175,000. We have money in reserve for that, about $500,000 in reserve. It wasn't because we had surpluses. I didn't go into the reserve to pay some $400,000 that we needed this year. So there was a small deficit, but was covered by the two previously. Insurances were a little more expensive, and human resources, because there was no one in their service, we had to hire a consultant for 3 or 4 months. So this created a deficit there. A small deficit with regard to maintenance and repair, Park, Uniplex, and the Oval. We had to change some equipment and machines. With regard to public works, some $400,000, mainly clean up after snowstorms and patching of equipment. Gas also cost a little bit more, and patching. we expected that it was going to cost 200,000 more for patching. And to conclude, there's a $700,000 of other operational surpluses. Didn't memorize this one, so I'm going to have to check that one. But basically, these are some expenses here and there and external commissions. So $150,000 for waste pickup, expansion Dieppe, or immigration. We had a budget of $75,000 and it wasn't necessary to spend it. So there was a surplus because of that non-use of the funds. There was a small program for building renovation. So we had an 80,000 expenditure, so another 40,000 of surplus. So these are bits and pieces that all came together. Now, the 425,000 is what happened at the end of it all. What I've just explained are the estimates that we were making from September, the estimates we thought we were going to end up with at the $3.3 million. The 425,000 explains what happened. So the 300,000 for non-fiscal income, the actual income, we received two subsidies, one provincial, one federal, for $278,000. And this was to cover the costs of housing and transportation. We received 278,000 through the year, and I accounted for that. Secondly, I thought it was going to apply for 2023, but when I reread the agreement, we realized that we were supposed to apply to 2022. That's why it's seen there as a surplus, because it came afterward. With regard to salaries, a moment ago I mentioned that we had a surplus of 200,000. The actual was a deficit of $550,000 compared to the estimate for two reasons. Firstly, overtime cost more than anticipated with regard to the public works, that is cleaning up after snowstorms and also for firefighters. And the other 350,000, so the estimate was done in October, and now we're in February. We looked at what's happening. The IPC continued to increase. It went down a little bit, but the costs were higher. Two collective agreements had not been resolved, so we needed to estimate what it would be. So we increased the percentage for salary increases to be on the safe side there. With regard to public works, there's a $250,000 surplus. This is explained by just give me a quick minute here. It was for patching. So with regard to Place Champlain on Champlain Road, we did major patching along that road. It's a provincial roadway, and we didn't expect to be reimbursed there because we weren't redoing the roadway, we were just doing patching. And finally, the province decided to reimburse us. So first of all, I had considered this as a deficit, if you will, as I explained earlier, thinking that we weren't going to get any funding from the province. And finally, they decided to pay half of it. So $190,000 was sent to us for that. With regard to recreational facilities, there's a $220,000 surplus. The accounting rules apply here. That is to say, we had spent $60,000 for the cricket park, but because it's an asset, I took it out of expenses and I put it under the assets. So it gave us a small deficit there, or sorry, a surplus, which is included in that 220,000. And there were other things like repairs, arenas, which cost less than anticipated. With regard to transportation, we're talking from income from Kodiak Transpo. We had anticipated an amount, and it came better than that. So the rate of usage of buses was a little higher. And other operational expenses. So there's a little bit of everything in that. It's a kind of a grab bag. Building renovations, training, equipment, all these things cost less than we had thought. So this includes all this general operating fund. I'll stop here if you have any questions, because then I'm going to move on to water and sewage. Any questions by councillors? None? Let's go on. So with regard to water and sewage, we're talking about salaries, of course. There are many employees who work for the city, so the percentage in water and sewage, as explained earlier, this created us a surplus of $390,000. Water purchases, this was the budget that we have of the city of Moncton. We have a budget of $1.4 million and it cost $30,000 less. So it wasn't a big difference. With regard to other revenues, 135,000. These are interest accumulated on our investments and also the forest management that we do that belongs to us, where we have our water source. With regard to water meters, this was a huge surprise and a lovely one at that. The number of units has increased by far from what I had estimated at the outset with regard to budget. In this case, we're talking about 11,000 to 12,000 units that I thought we were going to have for 2022. And then we found ourselves in September. We got the bills from January to March and April to June. We don't have the ones from July to September. And we noticed then, well, the units are going out much more than I had anticipated. So I estimated another 400 more units, about $1,000 unit. So 148 altogether gave me a $380,000 surplus for the water meters. And to conclude, another 120,000 with regard to other operational expenses, mainly repairs, maintenance. These things cost less. It cost us $75,000 this, and there were some small amounts that were added to that as well. Now, the actual, what happened from October to December, we received all the figures from all sales of water meters, and we realized that the units, not just 400 units that went out, but more 800 units that went out. So 400 more units went out than what I had estimated, and 800 more than the initial budget estimate. So this will reflect on the next budget, but this is a surplus for that year. With regard to public works, there was a $65,000 amount, mainly one project. We had a project of $150,000. It only cost $85,000, so there was an amount left over which became a surplus. This is the same slide from the outset, but it's shown a little differently just to bring you back into context. So there's a 3.3 million surplus of the general operating fund from September to December for a total surplus of 3.1 million was transferred to reserve. Same thing for water and sewage, 1.1 million surplus, another surplus of 425,000, 1.5 million in surplus. We transferred 0.9 million into the reserve, and we have an end of year surplus of $600,000. This concludes my presentation, Your Worship. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Le Boutillier. Thank you, Your Worship. Could I have more details? Because when you talk about the water meters, are we talking about the units of water that are sold, the meters that are sold? We're talking about, well, there are two kinds of units. There is the variable rate and the fixed rate. The fixed rate is a one-to-one relationship for a residence. One residence is one. And on this side, we had estimated 9,000 units. But then there's a variable rate. So businesses or apartments, those that have a water meter, there's not really a unit there. It's the quantity of water that is sold to the ICI, institutional, commercial, and industrial customers. So we have to have a ratio to determine what is a unit worth by quantity of water. So we're talking about 240 cubic meters, which are equivalent of 1 unit. Depending on the quantity of water we sell, we divide it by 240, and it gives us the number of equivalent units. And it's this number of equivalent units that really had a big increase. We sold much more water than we had anticipated. Okay, so it's really water consumption here and not that physical meter which is sold. It's not the physical unit, but because there are many more apartments, for example, there is much more water being used by these units, water that has been sold. Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? None? Okay. Thank you for the presentation and for your details. Let's move on now to the next presentation, which is a public presentation on the amendment to the Municipal Development Plan and Zoning Bylaw.
Voilà, je sais pas, je pense que je suis en
Oui,
ligne maintenant.
absolument.
I
Bonsoir.
think I'm here. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors.
Excusez-moi.
Pardon me.
La présentation ce soir est pour
The presentation tonight is for a amendment to a bylaw. It's a public presentation. Here for the presentation, we have the critical dates for the application, a description of the proposed project, the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw and the municipal plan, and how we think about the process. With regard to the timeline, this amendment must be made to the bylaw, zoning bylaw, and the municipal community planning. The presentation will be done next June. April 24th, last week, began the process. On the 21st of June, there will be a public meeting, and on July 10th, there will be a decision made by the council with regard to this matter. In this case, the project is a project for Bounty Foods to increase its use of the land where there already is a plant. On Rue Champlain, you can see to the right, you have the current plant. You can see the woodlands with the schools, Carrefour de l'Acadie and Mathieu Martin. So you can see in this perspective, the placement of the lands. We're at the limit of the industrial park. The entry is on Industrial Road. You can see the schools, you can see the treed lands and a small water course. The increase that has been proposed is modeled on the aerial view. You can see behind this parcel of land in front, nothing has been proposed for the time being, and you can see the existing building here. So with regard to the natural characteristics, at the boundary of this land, there has been a stream identified. Part of it is underground, and part of it goes into the forested lands. The proposed increase respects the limits that have been imposed at distance and so 30 meters from any water course. You can see on the proposed site plan what has been proposed, the 30 meters compared to the water course, and according to it's 26 meters from the boundary. The water course is a little further away than the boundary. So the amendments that have been proposed to the municipal plan, here you have changed from commercial to industrial. So this goes from CS, goes to Zone P in the industrial park. For the different points. There was a first proposal regarding the proposed facade. You can see that we had identified that it was going, we wanted it to look a little better. There's a second proposal. You can see the difference between the two pictures here. This is going to be one of the items that is going to be brought forward for study. We have the substantive change to the facade. Another part of thinking that we're going to bring forward is the part in the front of this land, which will be zoned industrial, but do we want to add conditions without having going forward in front of council and not have a proliferation of industrial uses along the road? So this is some discussion that will have to be had. Once again, this is the public presentation. I repeat that again tonight. So there are things that are going to be sent back. Then further to that, there's going to be a public hearing. And I also want to say that we have representatives from Bonté Foods who are present here tonight as well. And this is for the presentation of the project. So we are here to hear your comments and questions. Thank you for this presentation. I'm going to ask if there is a representative from the company who is here tonight, and if you had any questions for us or not before we move on to questions by members of council. They're behind in the back.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Question de la part des membres du conseil.
Questions by councillors? Councillor Lantagne. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation. Quick question, page 38 of the project. I'm trying to see what the difference is between proposal 1 and 2. I see there's a corner there. It's the grade. It's just the appearance. That's the only difference. Yes, that's what we've observed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Godbout. Thank you. As I hear talk about the project, I appreciate it more for what it is, but I still have some questions. Why is it a good idea to rezone a parcel of land to industrial when it's neighboring a school? That's a good question. In this context, the property, well, there's already an existing plant and we have limited space. This is the request we have received and that we're assessing. I don't know if Alexandre, Mr. Girard, it's a very good question. I think, though, what we're looking at right now at this point is if we see an application from someone to deal with the request for rezoning. As a staff, we look at the technical aspects of the application, but we also look at the aspects where the council, as mentioned previously, with other rezoning applications, can impose conditions on the proposed use. So the proposed use is kind of a food processing plant and storage. With regard to the creation of this, there could be some noise, further noise as a result of compressors or things that would be on the top of the building. But this kind of nuisance might also be created on any kind of commercial use building too. So it's not necessarily a nuisance that's particular to industrial usage. But to come back to the application, we're dealing with the application. We are informing council and the public about this application to add this extension. And for us, we are going to be certainly looking at imposing conditions to surround the application and do any follow-up if there are any specific things such as noise, for example, or any other elements that we may follow up with council. Thank you. Maybe I'll ask the question in a different way. to touch on your expertise because we're not expert in this field. So in municipal planning, is it generally advised to put a school next to a property in an industrial park? Is this something we would do if we started from the first plan? Is this something that you would advise us to do as council? I would say that no, based on the element, if there, unless there were conditions attached to a particular application, certainly we would see uses that might provide for other nuisances, but if we're an application for a specific rezoning, we still see the opportunity to surround this application in order to minimize nuisances, make sure that the application is properly understood and that this project is properly surrounded with the and in aspect of the surrounding area. With regard to the building itself, there are 100 meters between the physical school and this building. The whole operation is happening inside the building. So there's not outside storage, for example. In terms of other elements, the look of the building, despite the fact that in our professional opinion, is not a very interesting look with regard to this architectural look. There are some conditions that we could look at and work with, but clearly it's important to note that this use would be held entirely within the building. There are some setbacks from the property lines, and we're in discussion with regard to the whole matter and what kind of equipment would be on the roof of the building in order to make sure that the nuisances are minimized. Thank you. Councillor Le Boutillier. Your Worship, two questions. The first one is you spoke about a couple of impacts. Are there any other impacts or negative impacts that could change, that could result from this change from commercial secondary business to industrial park? What are the impacts that you could foresee? At this level, in my opinion, this is a question that the applicant to explain what kind of business they're operating inside that building. And it's an application to increase a building that is already in existence. So if there were any nuisances associated with the use, we would still be very aware of them today. And so I would invite the applicant to discuss these matters and explain what's happening inside the building, to provide you with some more information about the kind of business that would be operating as a result of this increase. With regard to other nuisances, as I mentioned, the uses is within the building itself. There are not any emissions that are attached to this business. Also note that we consulted the various provincial departments that might be overseeing this type of element associated with this use. And as mentioned in our report previously, one of the elements that had been raised was in regard to the noise of the machinery that might be set on top of the roof. So we don't have any specific comments related to emissions or odors or anything like that, especially with regard to the various people we communicated with in the province. Given the block that we want to rezone as such, the part which is facing Champlain in the future, so given that zonage, the part which touches Champlain in the future, can this company decide that it's going to sell that property? And is it possible that we would allow that on Champlain, the non-commercial part? The approach we're advocating here is if the council so wishes to proceed with this kind of usage, is to limit very specifically any development on the portion which is hashed in front of you, so that there be no undertaking, no development be undertaken on that part of the property. So if ever the applicant decided either to sell that part of land to a neighbor, for example, they would have to come back to council in order to eliminate this condition. So this condition would be in effect part of would be a law. This is a way of controlling a future use, which would be industrial. So with a condition that no wouldn't be allowed on that portion.
L'usage est effectivement là.
And so, I'm sorry. Yeah, so the use would be limited. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Lantin. Thank you. Now, just to add to what the councillors Godbout and Leboutier were asking, the lot that is closer to Champlain has a water course, so that would limit any activity in future too, no? Yeah, there would be some physical limits to the development. The water course was it is goes through a pipe, so it's not subject to the same measures necessarily. But yes, there would be a technical difficulties in terms of development, especially if they want to build a foundation and so on. I have no problem with the project itself. I have no problem with Bonte Food and what they're doing now. But in order to be proactive, let's say in 10 years down the road and Bonte decides to move away or close its doors, this building then goes up for sale and it's zoned industrial. How might we end up with heavy industry there? Somebody could go and set up shop with something that is makes a lot of noise, that pollutes right next to a school. Are we going to have full control over this? Even if it's zoned industrial now, we could still add conditions to limit that, or is it something that we would lose control over? No, the council has the right to limit the usage on this lot. They can say the only permitted use on this lot is for development landscaping. Yeah, but I'm not even talking about the undeveloped part. I'm talking about the building itself. Let's say another industry comes. Will they be able to conduct any activity they want? And will the conditions, we have to issue conditions now? Or can we add commissions later on if there's a new owner? Well, if council can add it to a resolution directly now that the development and the usage of the site will be specifically and only for the use as expected by Bonte Food in storage and the food processing industry. So we could add that now. We could limit the use of the building by adding specific conditions, and these conditions have force of law. It is a municipal bylaw that would be applicable. Okay. So yes, I think it's something to take into consideration. Thank you. Councillor Boudreau. Thank you, Your Worship. My question was exactly the same one as just asked by Councillor Lantin. So I was just concerned that if we change the zone now, that any other business could come and set up shop and could start producing anything and next to a school. That's probably not a good idea. I think if we do authorize this change, we have to make sure that we clearly define what the change is going to include. Thank you. Councillor Godet. Thank you, Your Worship. My question also was on what kind of industrial use could go there, but I got an answer. Now, the current operations, will there be different operation in the expansion, or it'll be the same but bigger? As far as I know, it's the same type of activity, storage mostly, but perhaps so to make sure that council is aware, it might be a good idea to have the developer come in and to tell you himself during the public hearing to confirm that the expansion is just to add storage space and that the normal activities would continue, because sometimes it could cause odors or have other consequences. So we just want to make sure that it's the same activities. Yeah, that's a very good question. I would add the developer to come take the floor.
No, you have to go to the microphone, sorry. And please identify yourself at the microphone.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Ann O'Brien. I'm the president of Bonte Foods. We've been there for 47 years, a long, long time. And our purpose for the expansion is to make our building bigger, to preserve the jobs of the people that we have at Bonte Foods, and to add more cooler and freezer space.
How many employees at Bonte Foods?
We're about 145 right now.
Okay, thank you.
So the goal is to add more jobs and to secure the jobs that are there.
Okay.
So we're at a point where we're stuck for space. We're renting outside storage, we're shipping products to outside of province, so we need the space here to stay in Dieppe. So.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's helpful. Thank you very much. Merci. C'est bien. Alors,
very good. Thank you for your presentation. I think all of the questions have been answered, so let's move on to the next agenda item. Mr. Cormier wanted to say hello, I believe. Your Worship, councillors, Jean-Claude Cormier, President of Environ Plus, Second Chance Workshop, Atelier Seconde Chance. First of all, I'd like to thank Council for the support they have given us, the support that we've received from the City of Dieppe, along as with the other municipalities. That has allowed us to buy a van in order to be able to bring our students, because it's not always easy for some of our workers who have certain conditions. It's not always easy for them to take public transit or to take buses. So this van allows us to go and pick up our staff. We now have 8 students at this time who work who will be working between 18 and 20 weeks to try and to integrate or reintegrate into the workforce. And I'd be lying to you if I told you it worked in all cases, but we do have a certain number of our students who have been able to find jobs, who now have permanent full-time jobs. So for us, that's a success story. And for the second part of these few words I'd like to invite citizens who have old furniture to get rid of. Please call us for pickup, or they can come and drop it off at 315 Big Boulevard in Moncton. Enviro Plus. You talked about cutting trees earlier. We feel that we are saving 150 tons of material that doesn't go to the dump, to the landfill. So for us, it is another success story, because the furniture that is donated to us can be cleaned quite often, can be repaired and sold or resold. So it allows us to be able to offer the service to our students, people who are marginalized, who want to try and integrate the workforce or reintegrate it. So that's about it. But once the tree has been cut and it's been treated in the sawmill, we try and fix it after that. Everything that comes out of everything that we receive is cleaned completely, whether it's mattresses, desks, chairs, everything is cleaned. And when when you're if you're leaving instead of turning towards Toyota, turn right to go to Ein Bio Plus, and you can call us at 506-853-7720 if you'd like to call us. So we've known you as a teacher, as a municipal councillor, and now as a salesman of an excellent project. You are helping people in order to put them on the right track. Thank you for the work you do. Any other questions by members of the public? As always, please identify yourselves. Good evening. My name is Véronique Cormier. I live in Dieppe. I have two questions, mostly on the trees. But before the questions, I'd like to say a big thank you. We read all of the details of the bylaw with great interest. We find it very ambitious. We find it great that finally we're doing something. So we'd like to recognize that and hope that it will remain as it's been presented. I had asked the same question last time, but I was wondering if there was an update to see if the tree studies are going to be made public. Are they going to be shared after they are prepared? Mr. Simard. Well, I'm moving ahead. I mean, I'm working on this, and I think it will probably be public. My answer is about 70% ready. I can't give you a final definitive answer tonight, but probably yes. And my second question, what are our options as citizens? I live near a forest where there are a number of mature trees, and I know that that's the case for a lot of citizens. We still have a certain number of forests. So this bylaw will protect trees, will trust in protect trees of interest and tree stands, and that's great. But will it necessarily the object is not to protect all trees, all forests, but it doesn't specify where the trees will need to be maintained. And at the last meeting, it was said that people would cut the trees right up to this property lines because that's where they have to develop to put the draining in. Now I live on Barois, just beside the forest. There's a forest between Melançon, Barois, Centrale, and Bourg. So when you come down Melançon, it's that beautiful forest that we see on the right, on the left. So there are about 20 houses along that forest, that wooded area. In January, we learned that the owner, which is the Moncton Parish, had sold it. They had contacted some developers. We contacted them to try and negotiate if we could, if all of us, we would have, we would each purchase 50 feet extra at the back of our properties. Everybody was really interested. We considered that our demand was realistic. We know it's been done elsewhere, so it's realistic. But what we were trying to do, since we know that the forest was going to be sold, we wanted to protect the real estate value of our homes as well as a good number of trees. So we can't wait 10 years for the trees to grow back, because it's going to take 10 years for our property values to go back up. So this evening, we learned that the parish has sold that parcel of land, and that the new owner, a developer, wants to clear cut all of the trees before the bylaw comes into effect. So he's started working. So we don't want this to be another Centrale Street, even though we showed good faith and the church said, oh, well, don't talk to the press, let's maintain a good public relations. Please don't place it on social media, and we'll do our best. And then in the end, we learned that the opposite was done. So what can we do? We're desperate. Good question. Well, you just informed us that the lot had been sold. We knew that there was a possibility, but we didn't know it was going to be this quick. We will call the diocese, of course, to find out the exact situation, and we hope to find out who is the future buyer and enter into discussions to see if we can include this new bylaw and that everybody acts in good faith. That's all we can tell you tonight, because you just shared the news with us. We just, I didn't hear it directly, but somebody else told me that it was, and it was verified, validated. So we're all ready to purchase a part. We're not even trying to make a deal. We'll pay a fair price to maintain, to buy a 50 feet each, but just to keep some of those trees that are fabulous. Thank you. If you know the new owner, if that's the case, please ask them to contact that person. Thank you.
Your Worship, City Manager, councillors, city employees, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you.
Can you identify yourself, please, for the record?
I was about to do that.
All right, sorry.
I just wanted to make a little bit of an introduction about the importance of democracy. My name is Don Demke. I live at 2082. I served in the military. I served overseas. Democracy may not be perfect, but it's the best thing we found. Mr. Mayor, I wish you all the courage and wisdom for all the challenges and decisions you have to make, and mistakes that have to be corrected.
I'm not alone.
You're not alone. I'm just going to turn something on for the people so they don't look at my backside as I go on. Now, so I don't want it to come across that I don't like trees. I love trees. I'm here not just representing myself, but my small community, an old community. And but the words are mine, so I don't putting words in their mouth, but I do represent them as well. I don't know whether to cry or to laugh. This is a very ambitious tree program. I have experience in it. I have a bachelor's in civil engineering, a master's in environmental engineering. I was the requirements officer of CFB Chilliwack, and we had a similar tree program come in, and it lasted about 2 years before we had to cancel it. Very ambitious. The words, in theory, I agree with them. The people that are just watching it, and it is a little bit of a silent protest because of what our community is facing. We did not get consulted what's going on. Our community is under attack by the city and a developer. And for those that don't know, as soon as they get their permit to operate, an asphalt plant will be operating right next to our houses. The closest home is 30 meters away from the asphalt plant, that property line. There'll be a picture coming up. Again, I'm gonna ask if you want me to stop talking at any time, I will. I will. I love my trees on my property. I have thousands of trees. I have a pond area. Right now they're watching a young 14-year-old girl who's a figure skater here in the city of Dieppe. A lot of promise. I didn't put it on also because I want to respect her privacy and not air it. But these are the people that are going to be facing some very big challenges. They're probably the first generation that will not be able to afford their own home. That is the truth. When I first moved to this community, you could buy a bungalow for just over $100,000. Right now, a 2-acre lot on my street goes for around $100,000, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a house on it. Our little community is under attack. The person that's developing this property, which is the old Lakeburn Lumber, has over the years has clear cut practically all the trees. Since this new developer's come on, there was still supposedly a 30-meter buffer between streams. All the topsoil has been removed up to the stream. It is a one large parking lot. You are looking at 30 to 40 acres that are clear cut, 40,000 trees. It should give you pause, and that if you actually see the trees through the forest on this tree bylaw that you're putting in place, like, where is the problem? I try to be responsible. I follow the natural resources, hand prune all those trees, and I'm proud of those trees. Now, some people might say I have too many trees on my property. Some might not say I have enough. Some may say I don't have the right trees on the property. But those are my trees. I paid for those trees. I paid taxes for those trees. So they have a say, but they don't have a vote. And I think you should be very careful before you have an overreach into these homeowners. I've read the bylaw. I know you're going to have tremendous problems with having people abide by them. There's an enormous cost. I watched the briefing that was, I guess, a week or so ago. I think Oakville was mentioned as that they were looking at their system. You must remember that Oakville has one of the highest, I think it's around 100,000 after taxes, the average income there. They have some of the highest costs in housing and some of the highest taxes that exist in this country. We may not want to be following their guide. You're going to have many growing pains, but I think if the homeowners represent at much 1% of the problem of cutting trees, most homeowners will not cut a tree down because it impacts their property values. They're cutting it down because either it's dead or it's going to fall on their house or their neighbor's house or their car. Those aren't the problem. The problem is the developers. And when I look at what's gone on at Greater Lakeburn, there are much stronger laws than a bylaw from the city that are already in effect. The Department of Environment in the province has strict guidelines of a 30-meter buffer. That didn't stop it from happening. Within 30 days, that asphalt plant is going to start. You like my video? I hope you like my property. My property's under threat. I'm not going to want to work outside if that asphalt plant is going. I'm going to have a hard time selling that house, and so are my neighbors. When I ask, why would you put an asphalt plant, allow it to go in, which is now very close to the center of this city, after you amalgamate it past the highway, and I press that point, I only get one return. It's all legal. I know what that means. That means somebody starts pressing on, say it's all legal. Don't give a reason. Now this is about the tree bylaw, but it's not that far. The city prides itself, and it says it's going to be coming up, or it might have passed through, about that you're concerned about the environment and the family. For our neighborhood, we don't get it. We feel betrayed and lied to. Right now, you set up the planning board to fail by making a deal behind a closed door with this developer. That's a fact. So now you're on the hook. If you say no to him, he can come back and ask for damages. That's a fact.
Be careful what you say,
Yeah.
because, I'm not sure what you're talking about in terms of you seem to suggest that we did something illegal.
No,
and
no.
if that's the case, we're going to stop right here, right now. I understand your pain. We feel that pain as well. We've gone as far as we could legally, and I know that staff has been asked to monitor the area and make sure that all rules that exist are respected.
Mr. Mayor,
We've
please.
gone to court. We've lost, unfortunately. We considered the potential for an appeal of the decision that was made by the province, and after consultation with not staff lawyers, outside lawyers, to make sure that we were not party to that decision, and the decision or recommendation, I guess I should say, that came back from the law firm was you're throwing good money after bad. So
You want me to stop talking, Mr. Mayor?
we are where we are now. I'll let you finish, but if you suggest that we have done something illegal, I will put an end to this meeting right now, and a lot of people are going to be disappointed because they won't get to speak. So please continue, but be careful and be quick. I feel your pain.
I understand you feel my pain. I hear your words. My understanding is from the decision from the province was that they had to allow the one that put the appeal up because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the city did not have a bylaw in place to say no to the asphalt plant, and they had already given them 8 criteria before the board meeting. If they met that, then they could have it. That's what it says in that decision.
I'm not going to argue
Okay.
with you on that. I'm not going to argue.
Thank you for
Thank you.
hearing me out. I do appreciate it. I don't have very much else to say, but our community, some have been there over 60 years in their homes, and they have rights as well. They have constitutional rights to feel safe and secure in their home. They're already worried, and some have already put up their houses for sale for what's to come. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. La prochaine personne.
Bonjour.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. My name is Daniel Haché, and I was born here. I worked with your daughter, Yvonne, as well as JF as well. We're almost like family. I'm here this evening to represent my neighbors. This is not in the context of the trees, but rather for Leblanc Street, Leblanc Road. I represent 65 families, 65 times 3 or 4 people with children. That's quite a small community. And when I looked at the city of Dieppe was my employer. I worked in the recreation department for 4 or 5 years, and the values are inclusion and politeness. And recently, our neighbors have not been very courteous to each other recently. But I've been living there since 2012. Since my family, but since 2015, we've been getting complaints that the street is not in good conditions. They do patching every year, but I pay my taxes and all that. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's really a question of safety. The road has become so narrow that when it was in 2012, it's not at all the same context anymore. Now, there's a Domaine Nature, all of those houses now. There's about 100 houses. There's a number of extra motorists, bicyclists, pedestrians, and the road is my daughter almost got hit by a bus who has to drive. And we complain to the city, and most of us don't feel that we're listened to when we complain to the city. My objective is that if you could review this issue, the file of fixing, repairing La Bon Street, but it's a question of safety. I look out every morning. I look at all of the schools that go to Antonine Maillet because of the development going on. There's some 18 wheelers and they're allowed to go by there. I mean, they have businesses, but houses are being built. There are a number of trucks that go by. There's a blind hill as well. So you have to go into the middle of the street if you want to walk up it because the street has become so narrow. So could we go back, review this file? So instead of starting to work on Chemin Leblanc, de Lamblon Road in 2025, could we start now? Why wait an extra 2 years? But I was told that it's not in the budget. That's what I was told.
Monsieur Melançon, peut-être pour...
Oui.
Thank you, Mr. Melançon. Good evening, Danielle. I'd be pleased to have a discussion with you. Yes, it was forecast for the budget in 2025, a complete reconstruction of the phase one of Leblanc Road. We planned it over 2 phases. The context is that you don't have municipal services. So when you redo the whole thing, we're going to bring services to residents. So that's a discussion we're going to have with the 60-some families. So it's an investment. So every home will pay a third of the cost. So it's an investment by municipality and the resident too. In 2024, we were going to begin discussions with the residents to explain what was happening and the costs for every family, and to begin preparation for construction in 2025. We can begin discussions more quickly. Projects for 2024 are underway. So we want to begin those projects and finish them before the end of the construction period. But I'd be pleased to have a discussion with the representatives and to give you the context of the project that we're looking at and what it means for citizens. We could have this discussion earlier than we thought, but I want to say that it's on the radar for 2025. I appreciate that. And it's a matter of safety. Yes, for the matter of safety, we addressed this very rapidly last week, but we want to make sure that patching will be done very quickly. The work was supposed to begin today. We said that the asphalt repairs needed to be done in order to ensure safety. Well, not only safety, but also to have acceptable driving. I don't want to cut you off, but when you're talking about patching, are you talking about the width? Patching as we normally know it, to put money into, and then redo the whole thing next year. When we do patching, we're repairing for the year, and we hope that it lasts longer than a year. But in the medium and longer term, we want to meet with the group and tell you a little bit about what it means by rebuilding and to bringing services in. Thank you very much. And if we could move this issue ahead, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Anyone else? Good evening, Your Worship. Councillors, I'm Ghislain Chouinard. I live on La Fontaine Road in the new part of the nature refuge that has been annexed. Oh, welcome home. Yes, I used to live in Dieppe, and now I'm living once again in Dieppe. First of all, I would like to wholeheartedly support Danielle Hachet's comments about Leblanc Road. But I also would like to raise the issue of Melançon Road after the former limits of the city and the roads La Fontaine, Nature, and all the other roads around there. As Danielle has said, there are many families who live there, many children, about 100 children who take school buses or who bike along those roads. We have made representations previously to the Department of Transportation. We have called, we have sent emails, we have copied our provincial MLA, our councillor, Mr. Godet, has been copied. The situation is worrisome to us with regards to safety, with regard to buses and cars. For the cars, even children who are biking, even if the speed isn't very high, there are rocks everywhere that could be raised up by trucks going by. So my question is, we know that despite amalgamation, the roads in that area are the responsibility of the province and will remain so. So we've been told until we're told differently. However, after all of these representations, we have no clear answer from the province about what they're going to do. They said they're going to do patching with cold patch until the asphalt plants open. And after that, it's not clear what's going to happen. And so my question for you this evening is this one. As citizens of Dieppe, I'd like to know if the city which represents us has made any representations to the Department of Transportation of the province with regard to the bad quality of the roads in our area. Good evening. Unfortunately, we had predicted this situation 2 years ago when we talked about the white paper and then the green paper with municipal reform when roads would be a big challenge. Yes, we've had calls and contacts with representatives from transportation and infrastructure. We asked the question to find out what their plans and programs were, and we're still waiting for an answer to those questions. I can assure that we have passed this message on to the minister when we have meetings with the minister, when we talk about the condition of the roads that have been annexed by Dieppe. Many municipalities in New Brunswick are putting forward this same message. We repeat the message. We're waiting to hear what their plan is. And if there is no plan, then we are certainly going to very strongly ask them to develop a plan. Because yes, you are the citizens of Dieppe who have been annexed, and we want to represent you in order to have to put your voice forward to the province of New Brunswick. We're waiting to hear if there's a program. And if there is no program, we are certainly going to insist on having a program or an implementation plan. Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. My second question is I believe I heard a moment ago that the Champlain Road had been repaired, despite the fact that it was uh, re- a provincial responsibility, and then they were subsequently reimbursed because the road was in bad condition, if I understood that correctly. And I'm wondering if this might not be the same case. There's not only the Blanc Road, which is partly provincial, and Melançon, where it is very dangerous right now between Leblanc and Mariette. This is a part of the road where there are huge holes, despite the fact that the Department of Transportation has indicated that they were going to come. We still haven't seen them yet. So I would like to know if that's a possibility too.
Nous, on va continuer
We are going to continue to insist and push the province respect their responsibilities. And it's not just for roads, but in every sector. The province is not respecting its obligations. I'm not shy about saying this. It doesn't make me very popular. It's probably not going to bring any asphalt to you anytime soon. But this is the reality that all communities are living through right now. We are going to encourage staff to conclude the agreements they can with the province in the hope that eventually they will see the wisdom of repairing those roads, at least so they can be drivable and safe for our citizens and our new citizens, those who have been there, it's unacceptable. The answer you've been given is unacceptable. I had a discussion with our provincial MLA. Unfortunately, they're not in power. All they can do is make some noise. It's sad to say, but it's the reality of things, unfortunately. However, we plan to continue to push the province because sometimes the decision is not to the engineers. The engineers recognize that there is a problem. Maybe the financing is not always adequate for purposes. We cannot make you any promises for the reasons that I have just stated. We are going to continue to push. We are going to continue to, I know that the people we agree with the most and who are closest to us is Minister Alain, who is still responsible for the changes that were made. We'll remind him of that, and we'll see where that leads us. No guarantees at the end of it all. Thank you. My last question, without taking too much time, is if you get a plan from the province, are you able to share it with the people in our neighborhood? That's my plan. First of all, we want to know if there is a plan, and then we'll share it with you. You put it on the website of the city. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but you'll be informed. Thank you. Normally, when work is planned, a notice is sent to homes to tell people that work is upcoming. And so we hope that you get that letter. We hope that we'll be able to write it. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Melanie Aubin. You're tired of seeing me, but I'm back again. I have questions about the tree bylaw. There's some quick questions. I have 5 post-its. That's not too bad. And it's out of personal interest, but other people also wondered, when you do the tree studies and you say that you're doing a study of the state and the health of trees. So if you get a quest in January and you've got 3 feet of snow and there's no trees, there's no leaves, there's no flowers, how does that, before answering the question, Your Worship, can we answer the questions like that this evening? No, don't be shy. Well, there are criteria for tree studies. There are criteria and also the determination of the health. There's a reference for trees of New Brunswick. We rely on that with or without leaves. Those who do the studies are certified to do so, and they are capable of recognizing whether the tree is healthy or not. Okay? And I imagine with all of this, come up with the conclusion either that the tree is healthy or not. So what defines, what defines the fact that the tree is not healthy? Is there a definition? Does it have to be a sickness which endangers the tree? Or if it's a tree that has a fungus, considered to be carrying some kind of disease, but it's not unhealthy and it can still continue to grow and live for another 25 years. This is a matter that is part of what the arborist does, whether the tree can be treated or not. It's like treating a person for a disease. Okay, but that's my question, because if you're offering medically assisted death, it's not going to be, it's not a. I'm just wondering, what is the definition of a tree that is unhealthy or that needs to be cut down? That's fine. You've answered my question. Okay. There was another question about tree study, and I think I've got my answer to that. In point 15, the director can amend. The director is who would that be? The director? It's the statute says, the bylaw says the director can amend and that the trees will be transplanted. And my question is, what is the rate of success of transplanting a tree? What's the survival rate? The conditions must allow it, and you have to follow best practices, and the arborist makes the recommendation. So the answer is anyone who is responsible for managing the bylaw, be the director. We needed a generic title put in the bylaw. But all this, and I was talking to my counselor about this, the studies will be undertaken by the city for the city, and the city is promoting development. And at the end of it all, we ask ourselves, it's not a problem of confidence and transparency, but maybe when you don't have any information, at some point you ask questions and then you start reaching the limits of paranoia. So you ask yourself, as a citizen, can I be sure that this tree has been taken down for all the good reasons? Because it's been assessed. Is it really unhealthy? There's no chance of survival. That's what I'm a little concerned about. So that's the basis of my worry. And point 15, once again, it says that the director can amend the certificate if it sees that it's the only reasonable solution, or point one, or any other circumstance. So that means at some point, I don't know, a developer is going to sue you because they can't undertake a project. Is that a good reason to cut down trees? Because you're afraid of being sued. I'm not going to look at all the possibilities. But I can assure you that we have tried to eliminate as many gray zones as possible. But we have to respect the rights of developers who have private land. So if there are projects that comply with our standards, zoning and engineering details, this is a recommendation that we have about trees that's going to be taken into consideration too. We'll authorize the project. We're not there to block development in our city. But to what extent? This brings up another question. I have a big piece of property with lots of trees, or some trees of interest. I come up with a project for housing units, and if I've understood correctly, so I have to replant a tree, and I have to replant so many trees according to the size of the trees that I've cut down. So at the end of my calculation, I come up with, maybe I'm exaggerating here, another $500,000 of trees to replant. Then many tens of thousands of dollars, can we say, look, let me cut down and I'll replant everything that I want to plant? Is that a deal? Does it work like that? And it comes back to the question I asked you 2 weeks ago. Is the value of a tree newly planted equals the value that of a tree that's been there for 20, 60, 100 years? I don't know if you understand my question, but if I have a good project and I say I'm going to replant everything, is that okay? Do we have a deal? Am I going to be able to go ahead with my project? Once again, these are hypothetical cases. But basically, if the proposed project complies with the zoning and engineering processes, and if the cutting of trees is authorized, because we say that this is what's recommended, then the replanting rates are based on the size and age of the tree, and we hope that we've been fairly strong to say that it represents the value of a big tree and to think twice before cutting down a big tree. It's a consideration for conservation. But there's no tree that's guaranteed and is 100% protected. Unless it be a species that's protected by provincial or federal law, no. Last question. When you talk about external zone, about outside the urban boundary, they're not affected by this, but you have to advise. I'm not quite sure I understood. Or we're talking about this zone. They don't have to follow the bylaw, but they need permission to cut trees. I didn't quite understand that little part. Yeah, it's different. You've understood that. We want to concentrate our effort on the urban area where heat might make our population at risk. This is where we're concentrating on not losing trees. In the rural areas and in tree stands, there are other measures that we assess, but require additional resources to do any follow-up. So we decided that we were not there yet with regard to implementing that process that's going to come. So there will be a follow-up because I think it's sad not to have any act and in 10 or 15 years time because that, not everyone is going to listen to us and they're going to cut. Well, that's because we have to learn to walk before we run. Well, we're already ready to run because we're a little bit late. If we're late, we're still way ahead of many others. I agree, but why are we waiting? There's a lot of great forests. Why do we have to wait for them to be cut down? Because we're going to find ourselves in the same situation another 10 or 15 years. Well, maybe we should have done. Anyway, I think it's sad that we have an opportunity to have a plan. I think we'll give a chance to the runners and we'll be guided by what's to be suggested to us by the experts we hired for the whole matter. You know, it's hard to deal with theories and if so and what if, and it's almost impossible for us to give you all these answers. I know we've all reacted in some fashion in the media, for example. I've had calls from media all around about this whole issue, and I may not have been the best person to be called about this with regard to all the details, but I was told that I made out okay. We learn to walk, then we learn to run. Things are going to happen. But you have to understand that staff is going to be added in order to manage this file and to support Alexandre. Once again, I repeat, we have to learn to walk before we learn to run. We've made some progress. There will always be questions. Unfortunately, it happens in all sectors of the municipality, be it as simple as picking up garbage, for example. There are things that come out. Sometimes you scratch your head when you get a complaint about it. It's clear, nothing before 6 o'clock in the evening along the road. Some people don't understand that yet. I have a last question. If you don't have an answer, we can't project into the future. We'll look at the past. We had this tree bylaw that had been all approved for readings and all in 2019. What would Central Street look like today? Probably the same. There would be a difference. I think there would be a difference. I'm convinced there would be a difference. I'm convinced that there will be some success. Are we going to satisfy everyone? I've never succeeded in doing that at any time in my life. But with the answers I'm hearing, the rights of developers, the interests of developers were for development. I'm skeptical that we could have done better on Central Street.
Je sais pas. J'essaie de m'encourager ici, là, mais j'ai de la difficulté.
On a quand même sauvé une forêt. On a sauvé 4 acres de terre.
We saved 4 acres of land, of nature,
Alors, c'est pas visible
along the central zone.
une forêt mature sur ce site.
Merci.
Thank you. Anyone else? We're here for the night. We get the same pay. If not, let's continue the meeting. The next matter is adoption of the minutes of the last meeting. Will someone put forward that motion? Don't be shy. Councillor Boudreau. It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Boudreau. Councillor Boudreau moves, seconded by Councillor Le Boutillier. All those in favor will say aye. Against, nay. The minutes of the meeting held April 24th are adopted. Item 10, memorandums and nominations. Regard to finances, 10.1. Mr. Masson, we have heard the presentations. So all the information has been shared with our auditors and the treasurer. I think everything has been said and presented. That adopt the audited financial statements. For the reading of the resolution, Councillor Brideau. Thank you, Your Worship. The Council adopt the audited financial statements of the City of Dieppe for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2022, as presented by the firm Ernst & Young. I so move, Your Worship, moved by Councillor Brideau, seconded by Councillor Godet on the question. Seeing no questions, all those in favor of the resolution will say aye. Against, nay. Carried. 10.2.1, tender award. Mr. Melançon. Following a tender for mill and pave for 2023, part of the Bellevaux, Eric, Alphée, and Peel Streets. Further to this tender, we recommend that the tender be awarded to the lowest bidder, McDonald Paving and Construction Limited, at the cost of $797,101 plus HST, and authorize Englobe Corp to undertake engineering services at the cost of $76,000 plus HST. We so recommend. To read the resolution, Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. The Council award the tender for the project entitled 2023 Mill and Pave, Bellevaux, Eric, Alphée, and Peel Streets to the lowest bidder, McDonald Paving and Construction Limited, at the cost of $797,101 plus HST. Authorize Englobe Corp to undertake engineering services relating to said project at the cost of $76,000 plus HST, and further authorize these expenditures be defrayed from account number 3-3-35-58-7601, General Capital Budget, Asphalt Management. Moved by Councillor Thibodeau, seconded by Councillor Lantagne on the question. Seeing no questions, all those in favor of the resolution. Oh, a question, Councillor Brideau. All those in favor of the resolution will say aye. Against, nay. Carried. 10.2.2, Emmanuel Street reconstruction. This was in a tender. We received 4 proposals for this project, and the recommendation is for MacArthur's Paving and Construction at the cost of $156,710 million plus HST, and authorize Roy Consultants to undertake engineering services relating to said project. So it's the staff recommendation. To read this resolution, Councillor Le Boutillier. That Council award the tender for the project entitled 2023 Reconstruction in Manuel Street to the lowest bidder, MacArthur's Paving Construction Co. Incorporated, at the cost of $1,156,710 plus HST. Authorize Roy Consultants to undertake engineering services relating to said project at the cost of $150,000 plus HST, and further authorize these expenditures to be tracked from account number 3-3-35-58-7661, General Capital Budget, Coppin and Manuel Streets, and account number 4-3-90-58-7661, Water and Sewer Capital Budget, COP and Emmanuel Streets. That Council authorize a budget transfer in the amount of $230,000 from the account number 7-4-20-12-8940, Water and Sewer Capital Reserve Fund, to account number 4-3-90-58-7661, Water and Sewer Capital Budget, COP and Emmanuel Streets. I so move. Moved by Councillor Le Boutillier, seconded by Councillor Brideau on the question. Councillor, Mr. Thibodeau. We're talking about reconstruction in Mount Street and COP and Emmanuel Street. Is COP involved in that too? Mr. Cormier. Mr. Cormier. Yes, thank you. Good evening. It was just a budgetary item. It is done over 2 years. Okay, thank you. It wasn't supposed to be this year. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Against, nay. Carried.
Which brings us to PAC recommendations at item 10.3.1. Mr. Melanson. Yes, we'd received a request allowing a request to allow an accessory building in conjunction with a semi-detached building, and this was an amendment necessary if council wished to do so. So the recommendation of the Planning Advisory Committee is in favor of this, so that we recommend that council accept the recommendation by the PAC. Thank you. And who would like to read the resolution? Councillor Boudreau. Thank you, Your Worship. That council accept the recommendation made on April 19th, 2023 by the Planning Advisory Committee pertaining to the amendments to the provisions associated with the RHM and R3 zones in order to permit the accessory dwelling use in conjunction with a semi-detached dwelling use in addition to the single unit dwelling use. That council proceed with the first and second readings of bylaw Z-10 2021-6, and I so move. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Boudreau, seconded by somebody. Councillor Gaudette. On the question? Councillor Godbout? Yes, thank you. Could you talk to us about the decision that was made by the PAC? More specifically, did they look at the possibility of having a bed and breakfast or Airbnb type lodging? Well, good question. No, we did not think that this was a valid point to bring up directly to the Planning Advisory Committee because B&Bs are not permitted within semi-detached. So this is just a secondary use to permit an accessory dwelling in conjunction with a semi-detached dwelling. So it will not have the effect of allowing a bed and breakfast here. The objective with this recommendation is to allow an accessory dwelling in order to create a new dwelling within the semi-detached. Oh, okay. I think I understood your answer. I had that my interpretation was that this amendment would allow this. No, the bylaw allows a bed and breakfast within a single family dwelling. You can only have it within a single family dwelling. But what we're proposing here is to allow an accessory dwelling within a semi-detached, but that a bed and breakfast or some other tourism home house is still not permitted. Yeah, but within the accessory dwelling, would that allow them to register if it's within the zoning standards? Well, if people came to us to apply for a development permit, they'd be refused because it is not an authorized use within a semi-detached dwelling. So there might be people who who have illegal uses. That happens on the territory, but we have to we go on the basis of complaints, of course, but the bylaw is but tourism accommodations are not allowed within a semi-detached. Well, that's interesting because when somebody registers to become Airbnb or they have to certify that they're in compliance with the municipality. So, but in order to determine that they are not in compliance, could they come to the municipality? And if a neighbor complained that there was an Airbnb, could we then confirm that it's not a permitted use? Yes, we would do that. With the development permit, we can ensure follow-up. If people don't come though, if they don't come to get this permit, well, then it's very difficult for us to determine whether the use is existing, if it's illegal or not. So, I mean, we don't we don't follow on the Airbnb site. No, but a citizen can take the steps. I just want to make sure that we can make sure ourselves too. Well, yeah, if there's some sort of tourism accommodation within a row house or within a multifamily unit, that is not authorized, we can certainly act upon that. But just a note here that we have never acted that as with regard to tourism accommodation. We've never received a complaint in that regard. So it would be a first for us to so even if somebody didn't come get a permit, we've never had to follow up on that kind of matter. But I will the tourism accommodation is only allowed really within a single family dwelling. But it's this is just for accessory dwelling. Then this is for long-term accommodations. Thank you. Councillor Leboutillier, yes, those were my questions that Councillor Godbout just asked. But I'd like to go a little further because I completely agree with this type of development, this type of project. But what I'd like to see is that we look at the long term, that we are proactive and that we identify that it is impossible to have short-term rentals in the accessory dwelling in a semi-detached. And we want to make sure it's bulletproof. You know, we don't want people saying, oh, I didn't know. I mean, nobody's going to go look at that and look at their bylaws, but we'd be able to make sure people were aware. Thank you.
De mon côté, est-ce que
Oui.
vous voulez avoir un suivi
Yes.
avant?
Do you want me to answer before we read, because the bylaw is clear the way it's presented. If I could refer you to page 128 of your package, paragraph 1, it says that 5.31B and C are repealed and replaced by the following. So notwithstanding 3.26, secondary usage for a single family dwelling, and it talks about tourist accommodations. What is replaced here is that we're adding accessory dwelling within a semi-detached dwelling. So the tourism accommodation is still only permitted within a single family home. So we can follow up with you, we can take note of this, but would you like to have your further information before final reading? We still have time to to amend it if that is necessary. Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. My question is on safety. But when I look at these two images of the facade and the side view and the front view, there aren't a great number of windows. If it's in a basement, are there windows in a basement? I mean, they're not shown here. That's a good question. You have to take into consideration that all construction must meet the National Building Code. In the zoning bylaw, we include the use, but the National Building Code will regulate the building. So if it's a question of bedrooms, yes, you have to have windows for a bedroom. It has to be safe. It has to be built according to the National Building Code. So if you have see a drawing that you don't see the windows, there are probably windows in the back of the building, perhaps, and if this is adopted, and any accessory dwelling has to follow all of the National Building Code and all safety regulations as well. Well, the fact that we're adding parking for a second vehicle, would that leave sufficient room for snow removal? Is that provided for? Or do they have to bring their snow elsewhere? Well, we're not proposing to change the width of the asphalted driveway compared to the width of the front yard that might have more natural landscaping. But we want to be sure that the developers don't ask for exemptions either. Sometimes they might ask for a variance in order to widen their driveway. But the way this is presented, the way it was presented to the Planning Advisory Committee, and as we explained to you, we don't want this amendment to have an impact on the residential characteristics of existing neighborhoods. We want to maintain the existing width of driveways without getting requests and applications in the future to have front yards that are all asphalted. So there are standards, and there are standards and bylaws, and we're aware of this. Yes. Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. There are no further comments or questions. It had been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. It is carried as presented. Which brings us to municipal bylaws. We will start with bylaw Z10 2021-6 to amend the zoning bylaw. And this is the first and second readings for Z10 2021. Who would like to read it? Councillor Brideau? Thank you, Your Worship. First and second readings. Bylaw Z10 2021-6, a bylaw to amend the City of Dieppe zoning bylaw. And I so move the first reading, Your Worship. It's been moved by first reading by Councillor Brideau. It's been seconded by Councillor Le Boutillier on the question. Councillor Boudreau, thank you. Yes. Now, when we start charging for water and sewerage, are we going to charge for two different units, or will it stay on the same water meter? How will that work? Who wants to answer that one? Mr. Thériault. First of all, there are no water meters, so it would be both units on the same bill. So one single bill, same price with two units, yes. But two units, so they'll pay twice. Yeah, just to be clear. Is that what you had understood? Yes. Good. I don't see any other questions. So all those in favor of Z10 2021-6, who would like to, will signify by saying aye. Contrary? Z10 2021 has been read the first time. Let's move on to second reading. Councillor Thibodeau. Sorry, Councillor Brideau. Bylaw Z-10 2021-6, bylaw to amend the City of Dieppe zoning bylaw. And I so move second reading, Your Worship. It's been moved by Councillor. Oh, it's been moved in title only by Councillor Brideau, seconded by Councillor Le Boutillier on the question. Are there any further questions? If not, I saw here that they wanted to exempt developers who have asked for their permit beforehand.
OK. Alors, on va passer au vote à la deuxième lecture pour...
So, for second reading of Z-10 2021, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Contrary? Z-10 2021 has been moved in second reading by title only, which brings us to 11.2 bylaw E-1 2023, the tree bylaw. For first reading by title only. We have a presentation to explain. So Alexandre is going to make the presentation. It's a presentation to explain the bylaw one section at a time. I will try not to spend too much time on it, but we'll try and go over the bylaw to clarify certain points. So in section Art 1, where there are the definitions, what is a tree? Well, tree is over 10 centimeters diameter and more. A tree of interest is one that is 30 centimeters in diameter, that is healthy, that is not invasive. A planting tree is one that measures 4.5 centimeters diameter for deciduous, or 150 centimeters high for a coniferous. And the protection zone means the area on the ground where the roots are protected based on the size of the trunk. Generalities then, with it applies to the whole territory. There are different provisions for the urban and rural areas of the city for conditions. A boundary tree is one that most of the trunk is on the property. The responsibility of the certificate of authorization is transferable to anybody who is authorized to do the work. And the certificate is good for a period of 2 years. The person has 2 years to cut the tree and replant. So that's what we mean by conditions. There are exemptions. There's exemptions for surveying and geotechnical analyses, any work done by a crown corporation, trees that are located in or on a building. If you have one in interior courtyard, for example, any orchard, maple grove, or nurseries that are important, they're exempt. We're here, somebody who has received their permit prior to the date of this bylaw would be exempt, and somebody who has filled out their application, it's been received and paid for prior to the date of this bylaw, they're exempted as well. Now, prohibitions, no one shall damage or destroy a tree anywhere. It's no one shall plant a tree on land owned by the city, but they can be authorized within the urban boundary. An application for a certificate of authorization must be requested for any cutting or damaging of a tree. For example, somebody who cuts too many branches, that could be a fatal cutting, but disguised. No, they still have to ask for a certificate of authorization if more than 25% of the branches are to be cut. There are specific provisions for a dangerous tree. You don't need a CA, a certificate of authorization, prior to the cutting, but you need to show evidence within 7 days, and also any trees that are over roadways or sidewalks, you don't need a CA. Now, what is a tree study? Well, it's in Article Section 20, the study is good for 18 months. The minimal information is necessary. There'll be guidelines that will be shared with all professionals who are going to conduct these tree studies. In sections 11 and 12, it states who is authorized, any authorized consultants that are qualified to do these tree studies. It's defined. There's a definition of who an arborist is, and we will process these applications on first come first served basis. The city can verify and validate all of the information that is included. An arborist who knowingly provides false or misleading information, well, we don't. This would be fine. There would be fines, or there would be a prohibition of performing further tree studies for a period of 2 or 4 years if it's a repeat offense. And of course, there must be written consent from the owner of the land in question. And here, the only option, a certificate would be if there's the only option for a project that meets the other requirements of the city, if there's an immediate danger or high risk, if there's a danger for different structures, if it's necessary to decontaminate the ground, if transplantation is going to be done in an adequate manner, if the planting of other trees will be adequate, if good arborist practices are used, and if in other circumstances that the director considers appropriate. The conditions, they will include protection measures. We might ask pruning to preserve certain trees. It depends on the condition of the trees. And that's all in the definition. The work has to be done under the supervision of an arborist, and that the circumstances around the cut must be specified. If it's not during the nesting of birds, for example, There we have to take into account any trees of interest or other recommendations of a arborist. Now, how if the CA is incomplete, if it's false or if it's expired, the certificate will be refused if other alternatives are possible. If it's just for aesthetic reasons, or if there are nesting birds nesting or any type of particular animal, or if the trees have a special status, if this is harmful to protected ecosystems, parks, or public infrastructure, if the fees have not been paid, or if it could cause the risk of flooding, or once again, in other circumstances as deemed appropriate. There is an appeal process. If the person doesn't agree with the decision of the city, they have 15 days to appeal, and the appeal process has to be done within 60 days, and there will be an appeal committee who can confirm or modify or even repeal a decision. In part 3, we talk about the creation of housing, commercial or industrial space, new streets or projects. Section 19, it's the minimal requirements, whether any trees are cut or not, whether it's a vacant lot or not. If one tree must be planted per unit, per housing unit, or one tree per 10 meters of street created. This is what Moncton is doing currently for any new streets. It's $55 per meter of street of development charges. So it's similar to this. In section 20, compensation for trees of interest, if they are authorized, they have to be replaced. The DBH is always rounded up to the nearest whole number, and there's a number of trees that must be replanted here. Inversely, if the tree is maintained or wooded areas are maintained, well, then we can give a credit on the number of trees to be replanted. So it's an incentive to conserve as great a number of trees as possible, which is important. It's one tree per 100 square meters of wooded area that is conserved, and the ratio is equivalent to section 20 for trees of interest. Sections 22 and 23, any remaining fraction shall be considered as a planting tree, as a complete tree. There might be other requirements, for example, with the zoning requirements, or expansion Dieppe might have requirements for landscaping, so they have to be taken into account as well. For example, the project has to meet the zoning minimums, but if there are any extra trees to be planted, then we'll calculate the difference. We don't include shrubs and bushes. Section 4, sections 24 and 25 apply to applications for certificates for other types of project. For example, building of garage, pools, fences, or for sick or dangerous tree. Here, we're talking about the replacement of trees. It's the same as for trees of interest. It's a replacement of trees that must be compensated, or we have to ask for a replacement for trees between 10 to 29 centimeters if you're lower than one tree per 10 meters of frontage. For example, in your backyard, you cut the only tree that you have, well, you're going to have to replace it from 1 to 12. Now, dead, dangerous, or diseased trees, you're going to ask for a replacement. If I only had a couple of trees, if one of them dies, you're going to ask that it be replaced by another tree if you're below one tree per 10 meters of frontage. Now, the mandatory declaration of key cutting. This is outside of the urban boundary. Here, the owner has to declare that the tree was cut, the number, the type of tree, the location, the other pertinent information as well. Section 6, this is the conditions for the certificate of authorization, the CA. In the CA, you might have specific conditions on the types of trees, their size, their height, their type, their number. And for example, we're going to ask for a landscaping plan that would define exactly where the trees are going to be planted, the species, if they have to be fertilized or other treatments, or to make sure that they grow properly. And once again, there's a 2-year period to do so. They must be maintained in perpetuity. If the trees die, they have to be replaced. And there might be other conditions as well as necessary. And the activities that are prohibited, so no signage no one shall affix a sign or damage a tree to direct exhaust fumes from equipment towards the foliage of a tree from a generator. So we really want to protect the tree during when there is work being done. But concretely, we're talking about putting fences around the protection zone, and the protection zone changes according to the trunk of the tree. And on the fence there, you're going to post the conditions so the inspectors will be able to identify exactly which tree it applies to and the measures taken.
S'il y a des modifications à faire pour la zone de protection, parce que
If there are any amendments for the protection zone, so if the road is in there, that work may be authorized, however, or required if it requires protecting the trunk, protecting the soil, cutting branches or roots according to best practices, fertilizing or correcting or amending the soil. Articles 31, 32, prohibitions that are defined to place material or temporary structures, including temporary toilets, amending the level of the soil or any other damaging activity, to post the certificate of authorization to eliminate, if you will, the citizens' supervision. There will be signage to ensure that the request for the permit has been authorized. A certificate of authorization might be revoked under certain conditions under Articles 33, 34, and 35. Stop work orders might be issued if there's an infraction or conditions are not complied with. And also monetary penalties can be issued as well. And return to work if the payments have been made of fines. Section 7, this deals with the trees that are not planted. Administrative fees of $35 plus $100 per hectare if there's more than 1 hectare. These are not astronomical amounts. We're talking about recovering part of the administrative fees. When you talk about tree studies, we're talking about several $100s for each study. There is no fees for cutting branches, dead trees, dangerous or unhealthy trees, and declarations outside the urban perimeter. We don't charge someone for something that's natural, like a tree that's died. Every project must have a deposit of $500 per tree to plant, or $500 per 10 centimeters of trunk diameter to a tree of interest to protect, or $500 per 100 square meters. This means that there's a guarantee that the trees are planted and protected. And then if there is an infraction, then the money is used to repair the issues. There is some for a project that's already underway for development for Expansion Dieppe, we're not going to go into those fees. If the tree planting doesn't cover all the costs, then we request a $500 per tree. If the project requires all the calculations of the formula, so 80 trees to plant, but on my plan there are only 60 planted, then we're going to charge $500 per tree to the city and put that in the program for planting or subsidizing plantings for residents. Finally, implementation. The bylaw officers will be appointed by council to inspect, issue fines. The amount of the fine is between $100 to a maximum of $2,100. It could be per infraction. And if any part of the bylaw is invalidated by a court, the rest of the bylaw remains in effect. There's a very quick reading of an overview of the bylaw, but I hope it has cleared up some issues. Thank you. Thank you. We'll proceed with the reading. And if there are any questions about the presentation or anything else in relation to the bylaw, E1 2023. So for the first reading, for first reading by title alone, moved by Councillor Boudreau. Thank you, Your Worship. Bylaw E-1 2023, tree bylaw. I so move. First reading. Moved by Councillor Boudreau, seconded by Councillor Godbout. On the question. I have a question. Go ahead. Thank you, Your Worship. I have some quick questions. Let's begin with the definition of tree of interest. I'm afraid that with this definition, it will be selecting tree species because some trees are not necessarily 30 centimeters in diameter. For example, some species that are fairly important for water filtration and to prevent erosion. Is there something? If there's nothing really in the bylaw that states protection for birch trees and other trees. These trees, by extension, are considered as defined of birch trees or other trees that are important to conserve. Well, they'll be defined by the arborists and they will be recommending conservation of birch and willow trees. If you want to reward that effort for conservation. In section 282, who will cut 25% of the branches of a tree? That means that someone had to cut a branch from their tree. They could do so without requesting a CA. That's right. There's normal maintenance of branches without it affecting the health of the tree. But we have to still draw a line about what we're regulating. The 25% is applied in other municipalities. Because sometimes people they cut their trees and will damage the trunk. You know, they take out parts of the trunk by cutting some of the branches. But some education has to be done. You know, if you're trimming a tree, you have to do it in a certain way. Yes, and to that point, the city offers a service. So if someone has questions about the health of their trees, all they have to do is contact us, and we are more than happy to answer their questions. We also work with the Department of Communications to get information packages out. In section 3, foundation, minimal requirement for planting. It says you need one tree per residence, and it doesn't specify if the tree has to be in front of or behind the property. Does it matter? We didn't specify where to plant the tree in front or on the side, because in the consultations, it caused more logistical problems to say there was a strict rule about putting it in front, or if the tree is on the property, we're happy with that. And then under the compensation for trees of interest, this is the thing.
Ouais. Par exemple, on est dans un endroit où
For example, there's a ecosystem of white pine, and we say, okay, you can cut those trees to preserve the ecosystem of origin. Are you going to advise to replant the same type of tree, or is it up to the developer to do what they want? Because if you cut a big oak tree, for example, and you plant 12 small birches, I'm not sure if there's going to be a recommendation that we could add to the bylaw to replace a tree by the same species of tree to conserve the ecosystem that was already there in place and maintain it as much as possible. That's a good idea. I think we hope to have trees of a certain diameter, a mature tree that would match a species that had been cut down. That would be desirable, but not always able to do that. These are in the conditions of the certificate of authorization. We could add those conditions about the type of trees to replant, the type of species to be replanted, or have at least a list of species. Could we have that list of species that are going to be recommended by way of information to see what type of species? I can provide it to you. Basically, it takes the list that was in the tree code based on indigenous species, but ornamental species can also be authorized. I have other questions, but I'll let others have a turn. We'll come back to you if necessary. Councillor Lantang. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Alexandre, for this presentation. It's very exciting, really, to have the tree bylaw presented and approved. I have a couple of questions. Not details about what kinds of trees, what size of trees, etc. I'll leave that to the experts, and I'm far from being an expert. But I have some reservations and concerns. And after thinking about it, there are lots of people who have approached me with this, with the same reservations and concerns. I know we've already spoken about them, that everyone had to do their part. If you have a residential property, like my house on my property, for example, the majority of people who talked to me about it said that these single residence properties should be exempted from the tree bylaw. I think so too, and I'll tell you why. Basically, I got a lot of calls from citizens, and without using any harsh words, they say it's a little like a communist approach, that we won't feel like we're at home. It's our own property. It's a tree that I bought and paid for and planted. That was one of the comments. And others said they recognize that the reason we're talking about this today and that we're at this point is mainly because of bigger developments. Not talking about Central Street, but a developer buys hectares of land, cuts the trees, subdivides, and there aren't any rules in place. So the problem issues from that type of activity. So as what gentleman said earlier. What is the number of people? How big is the problem if that it would cause on our own properties? One of my concerns is that it's about the whole municipal administration and the employees and the number of existing residential properties in Dieppe. There might be some 9,000 homes, if not more. You are going to be overcome by requests. I think this is going to explode on you with only 2 or 3 people. I think you're going to have much more to bite off than you can chew. And it's certainly going to lead to frustration. There are certainly people who are going to be cutting down trees without ever getting a permit. There are neighbors who are going to take pictures and show up with them here. There's going to be quarrels between neighbors. I think we've created a lot of issues, if you're okay with that, but I think it's going to require a lot of energy, and it's certainly going to mean increased costs. There might be court cases as a result of this. As I said, there are people who are going to put in complaints. With 2 or 3 employees, it's going to be more difficult. People won't have the patience to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get a permit. Once you've got a tree there, they're going to go cut it down. And if you're busy, if it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get the authorization, all of this to say that the problem is not only from big developers. What happens if I have a neighbor behind? What if I decide I want to cut down trees because I want to make a garden? Am I going to be told no? And say, no, you can't cut down those trees. You can't have a garden because you can't cut down those trees. So these are all questions that came to me. So how are you going to control someone who can only cut 25% of the branches of a tree? It's going to require a lot of work, logistically speaking. So for this reason, I'm 200% in favor of the tree bylaw, except for residential properties. That's my comment. Thank you. Before you answer, just by way of information, at 10 p.m., if we haven't ended this discussion, we need a resolution to continue. I'm advising you beforehand because that's the municipal rule. I don't want to delay anyone. Maybe you don't have to repeat everything and sort of shorten your statements. So now you can you can give your answer. That's all I had to say. And quickly, to come back to the whole issue of private residences, we are not a fully developed city. We're in expansion right now. In all cities where we looked at this type of thing, the loss of trees on private lands is there, and that's why we wanted to bring it forward. We are like a teenage city, if you will, and so by the time we're adults, we've got a lot of catching up to do. So I think that there is some relevance to the fact that we have a bylaw for private properties. With regard to managing demand, consulting with regard to volume, I expect we're going to get 200, 250 applications per year. I don't know about the rest, but we'll be managing. My last question is with regard to outside in the rural areas. I think we have to be proactive because to come back to what Melanie was saying, had we been proactive, well, we are proactive. We're going to be the first in Atlantic Canada to do this. Let me say that at the outset, that if we don't act right now, the city is going to expand. We're talking about domaine nature and all those areas outside. If we don't act immediately, if we're not proactive, once again, for single properties, I'm less worried with regard to developers. Developments can do development, apartments. I think it's time to look at that right away, and I think it's important to include that at least for commercial development because it's going to take a permit to develop in a rural area. So that's my last question. comment rather. If I may answer quickly, we consulted other urbanists, and this type of project is not allowed in rural areas. So we're comfortable with that for the time being. Thank you. Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you, Your Worship. I like this bylaw project, but I don't really like the fact that there's an exemption for someone who's for a developer whose request has been paid, because we see how many people cut down trees before this bylaw is going to be passed. So I think they should not be exempted. They should comply with the rules. They cut trees, they should plant more again. So I don't think that we should allow that. My second point is when we do different subdivisions that are side by side, we should require a buffer zone to be left. I'm not sure what the size of this buffer zone should be, but I think we should do that because currently there are people who are building big houses, single family houses, and they're going to have an apartment building right behind them. And I don't think that's right to have a development like that. So I think this is something that we should add to this bylaw. Thank you, Councillor. With regard to buffer zones, it's not that we don't want to recommend them, but with the results of the tree studies, we can say it's possible to have a buffer zone that won't cause problems in the future. With the expansion of Dieppe, buffer zones had been required, and 3 years later, the trees were cut down. We had nothing left. So the tree studies are going to determine where are the best possibilities for conservation and connecting woodlots or the creation of other lands. With regard to the whole matter of exemption, I think my colleague can answer that. With regard to the matter of having a permit or an application which has received a development permit or a request that has been analyzed by our service, you can understand that these are major projects that where they have presented all the information necessary. So we're talking about a drainage plan, site plan, construction plan. We have all of that together, and we are then able to consider that these are complete applications. If they are not exempted, related to a complete application, then maybe it's a little different than the legal context. We talk about having a reasonable delay for all the developers who took all the measures they needed to with the bylaws that were in effect with regard to their development. And that's why we think it's good to include it within this bylaw. Another key message here is that developers probably aren't interested in cutting their trees prematurely. So this is something that is worthwhile to share because there are certainly elements to be considered before doing that. They may not be taking advantage, but go look in the sea between Key and Dieppe Boulevard and see what happened, and other places too. We've been talking about this tree bylaw for 2 years, and it's taken time. I understand why. I'm not blaming anyone. We didn't have the expertise to do it. But when you see that developers were rushing to cut trees before we pass the bylaw, I think that we should be doing something. Is that it? Thank you. Councillor Le Boutillier. Thank you, Your Worship. Some questions have already been answered. My question was about Bylaw 10 for the 18 months allocated for the study. How did we come up with that 18-month period? It's a measure we took because we said the person is going to get their tree study done probably in the spring or the summer when the trees are leafed out and it would be of interest to conserve, and the person can go on their design project and be in dialogue with the municipality, but the permit has not been issued. In order for the permit to be issued, they have to comply with the requirements of the rest of the zoning bylaw. So this tree study has to be valid during the time that they're dealing with the different municipal services. And so within 18 months, the soil conditions should not change very much, but there's various provisions to the effect that we judge if there, where there was a loss of trees because of high winds. There are things that we can look at and we can judge whether the application is complete or not. Oh, I thought it was the opposite. I thought 18 months was too short because sometimes you have a plan, you want to do the study, and then you get a development plan or a housing plan. It can't happen right away. Maybe you have a delay before you build the house. So an environmental study is good for 4 years. So I wondered like where that 18 months came from, and also to avoid to redo this work. If after 18 months there's a need to revalidate it, we take the car, we walk the property, and we confirm that the trees are there. It's not a big deal after to review the thing after 18 months if necessary. Thank you, Councillor Godbout. Thank you. A couple of quick questions. First of all, thank you for the bylaw. It's a lovely gift for us, and we appreciate the work that you've put in. With regard to transition, this bylaw is a cornerstone for many other things. I don't know if things are going to happen afterwards to support the vision of what we're launching here. And so I'm wondering, in this perspective, if we need a clause in the whereas, a transition clause, which indicates that this bylaw, if it's in conflict with other bylaws, would have priority of interpretation, to say that this is the direction we're heading in. I understand we have to be careful of this, but I'm asking the question, is there a way of writing this to say this is the direction we're heading? We have to catch up with the other bylaws. But first of all, read this in order to get the right interpretation. Is it possible to do something like that? I'll throw the ball back to my colleague, Stéphane. It's an idea, Stéphane. I'm just throwing it out. I just wanted to mention it, okay? Another question. In the definition of arborist, talk about what it takes, what's required by way of education. Are we going to require them to register with the city? So we have a list of accredited arborists with the city of people that we recognize. Look, I consider that because it exists in other cities. However, it's not something that we can implement right now. However, in the guidelines for tree study, the arborist is going to sign with their number, recognition of their designation. It's a regulated profession in any case. Is there something you do with due diligence to check that? Yes. Another couple of quick questions. I'm following up what Councillor Boutier raised with regard to the tree study. I love our council because we have so many different perspectives when we are assessing things. I looked at the 18 months and I had no questions about the 18 months. But when I saw the 18 months, plus the certificate of authorization, which is good for 2 years, is that too long? Because then you have 3.5 years between the study and the cutting of trees. So I'm wondering if that's even too long. But as I understand it, you can go and visit and check things. So between the period of the assessment and the cutting of the trees, it could be up to 3 years later. But the certificate of authorization is valid for 2 years, but it includes planting of trees. So the cutting and the planting trees and the work has to be done, especially with regard to permits and the rest. Gérald, so we have 6 months, 6 months to begin construction, a year to finish it. Now I need a motion to continue the discussion moved by Councillor, Lantang, seconded by Councillor Thibodeau.
C'est ça, on tombe en overtime. Alors,
Yeah, we're doing overtime now. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Contrary, nay. We'll go on. I'm almost done. I'm just following the rules myself. Okay. The issuance of a certificate of authorization in the 9th criteria, it says there are other circumstances that the director considers appropriate. I have a suggestion for the administration to, in the first or second year of the application of the bylaw, try and develop some rules and regulations to explain what is considered appropriate, to try and really frame this a little better, not to change the use of discretion, but to state, okay, you're going to apply it in this and this a way. Yes, I think it would be a good way, seeing as we're going to be growing and changing and learning with this bylaw, it might be a suggestion to really frame this discretion that the director will have. My last question, mandatory declaration, there's going to be procedures, of course, but do we have an idea of the timelines, how long we're going to give people to declare it? No, we haven't defined it because we're going to need to make people aware of the bylaw. If there's a tree that's cut and hasn't been declared, well, the first time will be a warning, and then it can go to a fine the next time. But we haven't put any timeline in there because we want to give people time to get used to the process. Thank you. Nobody else? Councillor Godet. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question. For Councillor Lantin talked about this. You said, people think, oh, it's my house, it's my yard, it's my tree. Well, how are we going to manage that? And we have bylaws governing outdoor fires and dogs. I mean, you need a permit for that. Are we going to give warnings to people like for outdoor fires or dogs, or how? No, people are going to say, oh, I didn't know. And, are we going to give a warning the first time around and then, or are we going to give a fine right away? I think the approach, especially in the first few years, it'll be an educational approach to give information. If a tree is cut, we'll work with a person to come up with a solution. We don't want to, kick people out of their homes because they've cut a tree down either, but there's no fees for sick or diseased trees or dying trees. We know people care for their trees. People love their trees. People look after their trees. And so the city is going to have an expert on staff who can call you and give you advice. So yeah, some people interpreted this differently when they read it, but Your Worship, I can assure you that we do have a communication that is ready to be sent out as soon as this bylaw is adopted to first of all inform people of the existence of the bylaw. The not being aware of it is not going to be an excuse. So we have to wait until it's adopted in final reading, and then we will offer communications. Yes. So I think we were at, no, we're at first reading. We just need to vote on first reading. It's been moved. No, we hadn't even read it a first time. Yeah, it's been moved by Councillor Boudreau, seconded by Councillor Godbout. And now ready for the question? But in first reading. Okay. For first reading, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Contrary will say nay. The bylaw E1 2023 is carried in first reading and by title only, and we will now move on to second reading by title only. Councillor Boudreau, seconded by Councillor Godbout. Once again, all those in favor of this will signify by saying aye. Oh, just to make sure that the procedure is correct, which we want to make sure we are following the procedure. We don't want to have any proceedings against us. We want to make sure everything is done correctly. Go ahead and read it. Thank you. It's bylaw E-1 2023, a tree bylaw, and I so move it in second reading. Thank you. It's been moved in second reading by Councillor Boudreau, seconded by Councillor Godbout. On the question, all those in favor of the resolution will signify by saying aye. Contrary, and it is carried. Bylaw E1 2023 is carried in second reading by title only, which brings us to notices of motion, of which there are none. Okay, inquiries and announcements by members of council. I think it's Councillor Godet's turn to start this evening. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of points. We've heard a lot about Leblanc Road this evening, so patching will get underway, and we will be inspecting it to make sure that it's safer. We will make sure that the patching is done properly and the quality will be there. Yes, and we do have a staff person who is supervising all of the patching work. And I also had some calls about Rue des Élèves, some trucks that park there, that park in front of the school when the kids go to school in the morning, and they bring construction material to the construction sites. Has anything been done for that? Any signs? What school? Well, Rue des Élèves. We'll follow up on it. Has it been put in the system? Your request? Yes, we will follow up. Thank you, Councillor Godet. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Le Boutier. Well, I have a couple of comments and questions. Along with the Regional Service Commission and Expansion Dieppe, are we expecting any changes, or are we expecting the services to remain the same? I can answer that one. Essentially, nothing will change very much for the municipalities that already have a service in place. But of course, there will be cooperation at all the different levels. But the team at Expansion Dieppe will continue on doing the work they are doing. Thank you. This past weekend, I was asked something and I had no idea how to answer. When when we develop lands, we have a drainage system that's always at the edge of the lot. Well, first of all, why? But the question from the resident was, a group of residents. I went to the market on the weekend and I was hijacked there. But so people were wondering, well, why wouldn't we put the drainage at 75% of the lot line so that we could leave more trees? That was the question. Is there a reason? That's my question from the residents. I don't know who should answer that. Marc-André, perhaps? Well, traditionally, usually we go to the edge of the lot, and yes, we have to cut down all the tree, but there's no reason why it couldn't be done at the three-quarter line and keep some trees. It's just in the past, that was the practice. But I think we are evolving, and these are things that we're going to have to look at in the future, things to take into consideration. We hope that this bylaw will encourage the conservation of more trees and could be done, but it's possible. And my last, and I should have mentioned this earlier, when our treasurer presented the financial statements. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate management and all staff for the excellent financial management of the city. I think we're very lucky to have a municipality that is very careful and that maintained its ratios. And we have good ratios we have for a number of years already. And I'd just like to repeat that this year with the profits, well, not only profits, but we were able to put $4 million in reserve this year for a total reserve amount of $30 million, if I read the financial statements correctly. And I can tell you that there aren't a number of municipalities in New Brunswick that can really pat themselves on the back and say, yes, what great management. And for future, we have money in reserve for infrastructure and for these kinds of projects. So congratulations to the management team. And I'd like to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day, which is coming next week. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Boudreau. Thank you, Your Worship. I have two questions. First of all, from a citizen that is saying that in the Fox Creek, Amiro, and Marguerite Street area, have we considered adding traffic lights there? Apparently, well, there are two streets that come together at Amiro, and it's always a problem. There's a daycare right there as well. Perhaps we've already discussed this. Could we have an update on that? Yeah, we're aware of the problem. It's the village. It's from Fox Creek to Amiro. A couple of years ago, we had added traffic signs on the Melanson, traffic lights on Melanson, but we had looked at this as well. We'll continue to study the situation. Thank you. Thank you. Now, we were approached by the Petitcodiac Watershed Group and the Green Garden Cities because they had asked for funding for their green infrastructure project, Living Cities. And I was just like to get an update on that because they have money that they could use for infrastructure. And I haven't heard about this for a while now. I haven't received any news. Yeah, so we had a meeting with them and they shared their working document with us. We had some minor modifications to make to their document and questions of clarification, and we'll try and find some projects that are mutually interesting, but we have nothing definitive, nothing concrete yet, but we are working on it and we're in contact. Will they come and present eventually? Will they come and present to council? That might be an idea. As I said, we don't have any specific projects on the table, but yes, that's a possible, and we will share that information with you. Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Thibodeau. Thank you. I have nothing this evening. Okay, thank you. Councillor Godbout. Okay, thank you. I apologize to staff for keeping you this late. Thank you for your attention and for your resilience this evening. I'd like to also congratulate the team for their good financial management. And so it's great. This is very important for the team at finances, but all of the management team that prepared and supported the budget. It allows us to have great trust in our planning, that it means that you are able to deliver on things that we are asking you for. And I was just wondering as well, and then perhaps next week or next the week after you could come back to us with where we're at, on what's coming up this summer, any updates on that, and on Amiro, the construction and the sidewalk, what's being planned this year on the corner close in front of the Home Hardware, where the lanes were shifted somewhat. It was would like to know what's going to happen there. There was an issue that I'd like to mention, if anybody has any information on this, is the corner of Chartersville and Dieppe Boulevard. There's a lot of traffic there, and more now with the certification and densification and the streetlights. Not the streetlights, but there are street lights that only light up one side. And when you come to Chartersville and want to turn left on Boulevard, there are a greater number of pedestrians, and you can't see them because the street light is not bright enough. There's only one on one side of the intersection. I didn't know. I mean, and I talking through personal experience. I mean, I noticed a pedestrian. I saw them in time, but I said, how, I thought, well, how come I hadn't seen them? But I realized that there wasn't enough lighting. I don't know if you have the intention of putting more lighting because of that new building behind the co-op, where there's lighting on one side of the street, but not on the other. And there's sidewalks on both sides of the street. I don't know what your intention was in terms of that.
Je vais noter les commentaires. J'avais pas
I
l'impression.
noted the comments. I had no impression that we were going to be adding lights. We'll have to analyze the situation. I'll check with regard to how bright the lights are there. Thank you. And the last comments over the weekend, there was a good experience between the two high schools, Mathieu Martin. They got together to put a team in to the Ultimate Frisbee National Championship. So we thank those who came to support, those who attended. Lots of francophones from New Brunswick. They were 15th, they were unknown, and they got to 7th place at the national championships. So it's extraordinary to see the symmetry of those who are normally competitors at Mathieu Martin, and they are at the Copacabana at the high school level, and they were together and collaborated on a mixed team, men and young women. So it's great to see the upcoming generation, and to all coaches and schools and those who are supporting our youth in the city. It's wonderful to see this. And I recognize Alexandre, who was there. He was an amateur player who was working with them to practice. So it's great to see members of our city who are out there supporting our youth. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Lantang. Thank you, Worship. As it's late, I will be very brief. First, thank you for these great presentations today. Thank you for your excellent work, either be for finance or the tree bylaw. And in conclusion, I want to share my sadness and my solidarity with all citizens of Dieppe who are fans of the Canadians, to say that we lost the Bidar lottery, but we hope we have a great season upcoming. So I wanted to share that. Many fans of the Canadiens. Thanks, and good evening to all of you.